The council chamber was filled with the usual noise of different alien voices. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their assigned seats, discussing trade routes and military budgets. In the human section, Ambassador Sarah Chen listened to the debate with growing frustration. The topic today was the Kepler sector crisis. 3 human colonies were dying from a strange plague that had appeared 6 months ago. The disease spread fast and killed within days. Human doctors worked around the clock, but they needed help. They needed the advanced medical technology that other council species possessed. "The risk is too great," said Councillor Vex, his blue scales shimmering under the chamber lights. The Zephyrian spoke with the cold logic that his species was known for. "We cannot allow this plague to spread beyond the Kepler sector. The safest option is complete quarantine." Sarah stood up from her seat. "Councillor Vex, we are talking about 3 million human lives. These are not numbers on a screen. These are families, children, people who trusted the council to protect them when they needed help most." The chamber fell quiet for a moment. Sarah had been making these passionate speeches for years. Other species respected her dedication, but they often found human emotions exhausting. The galaxy was a big place with many problems. Sometimes hard choices had to be made. Councillor Thane, representing the Crystal Collective, spoke next. His voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Ambassador Chen, we understand your concern, but we must think about the greater good. If this plague spreads to other worlds, millions more could die. The quarantine will contain the disease until we find a cure." "How long will that take?" Sarah asked. "Our medical teams estimate that without outside help, everyone in the Kepler sector will be dead in 3 months. You have technologies that could help us. The Thylorian healing pods, the Nexari biofilters, the Quellian cellular repair systems. Any of these could save lives while we work on a cure." Councillor Mira of the Thylorian healing houses shook her head. Her people were known for their medical knowledge, but they were also very careful about sharing it. "Our healing pods are not designed for human biology. The risk of making the plague worse is too high. We cannot take that chance." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had heard these same arguments for weeks. Every species had a reason why they could not help. The technology was too dangerous. The risk was too great. The cost was too high. Always there was an excuse. "What about evacuation?" Sarah tried again. "If you will not help us fight the disease, at least help us save the people who are not sick yet. We could move them to safe worlds until this is over." Councillor Vex looked at his datapad. "Our analysis shows that evacuation would require 400 transport ships and support for 3 million refugees. The cost would be enormous. Also, some evacuees might already be infected but not showing symptoms yet. They could spread the plague to new worlds." The voting began. One by one, each species cast their decision. The Zephyrians voted for quarantine. The Crystal Collective agreed. The Thylorians supported the quarantine. The Nexari, the Quellians, the Mordani, the Velcron Empire, all voted the same way. When the count was finished, only humanity had voted against the quarantine. 47 species voted to seal off the Kepler sector and let the plague run its course. 1 species voted to try to save the people inside. Sarah stood up slowly. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I have served on this council for 15 years. In that time, I have watched you make decision after decision based on fear and profit instead of doing what is right. Today, you have chosen to let 3 million people die because helping them might be inconvenient." The chamber was completely silent now. Sarah had given angry speeches before, but this felt different. There was something final in her voice. "I came here believing that different species could work together, that we could build something better than what any of us could create alone. I was wrong. This council cares nothing for life, nothing for justice, nothing for the values that should guide any civilization worthy of the name." She picked up her datapad and the small Earth flag that had sat on her desk for 15 years. "Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. We will no longer participate in your debates. We will no longer vote on your resolutions. We will no longer pretend that this body represents anything more than the selfish interests of the powerful." Counselor Vex leaned forward. Ambassador Chen, you are making a mistake. Humanity needs the Council more than the Council needs humanity. Where will you go? How will you survive without galactic trade and protection? Sarah looked around the chamber one last time. We will find our own way. We always have. She paused at the door. When the Kepler plague is over and you count the dead, remember that you chose this. Every single death could have been prevented if you had found the courage to care about something other than yourselves. The door closed behind her with a soft hiss. The council chamber remained silent for several minutes. Finally, Counselor Vex called for the next item on the agenda. Within a week, human representatives had withdrawn from every galactic institution. The human embassy on the council world was shut down. Human trade ships stopped visiting alien ports. Human scientists left joint research projects. Human peacekeepers abandoned their posts on border worlds. Some council members worried about the economic impact. Humans had been reliable traders and skilled workers. They would be missed in some sectors. But most representatives felt relieved. No more emotional speeches about helping the weak. No more demands to share technology with primitive species. No more moral arguments slowing down important decisions. The quarantine of the Kepler sector continued as planned. Long-range sensors showed that activity in the sector had stopped completely after 4 months. The plague had run its course. The council marked the incident as resolved and moved on to other matters. Meanwhile, human ships disappeared from known space routes. Colonies in disputed territories were abandoned overnight. Even the location of Earth itself became a mystery as humans stopped responding to all communication attempts. The galaxy was more efficient without them. Trade flowed more smoothly when every transaction did not require moral approval. Military operations proceeded faster without human peacekeepers asking awkward questions about civilian casualties. Research projects advanced more quickly when scientists did not waste time on ethical reviews. For the first time in decades, the Galactic Council operated exactly as most species wanted it to. Logical, practical, efficient, clean. The silence left behind felt like progress. Years would pass before anyone realized that the silence was not empty. It was not peaceful. It was the sound of something vital being torn away from the galaxy's heart. The sound of hope giving up. But in those early days, as council sessions ran smoothly without human interruptions, most species congratulated themselves on finally being free to govern the galaxy properly. They had no idea what they had lost. 5 years had passed since humanity left the Galactic Council. The galaxy had settled into new patterns and most species barely remembered the last time they had seen a human face. Counselor Vex looked over the latest reports with satisfaction. Trade volume was up 12% from the previous year. Military spending had decreased as border conflicts remained minimal. The efficiency ratings for council operations had reached historic highs. By every measure that mattered, the galaxy was running better than ever. The quarterly review shows excellent progress, he announced to his staff. Without the constant delays caused by human moral objections, we have been able to implement policy changes in record time. His aide, a young Zephyrian named Kess, nodded politely. She had never worked with humans and did not understand why. The older council members sometimes spoke about them with such mixed feelings. From everything she had heard, they had been troublesome and emotional. Good riddance. Across the galaxy, other species were enjoying similar improvements. The Crystal Collective had expanded their mining operations into 17 new systems without environmental impact studies slowing them down. The Velcrin Empire had established new colonies in disputed space without lengthy negotiations about indigenous rights. The Nexari had begun testing experimental weapons without ethics committees questioning their research. It was a golden age of progress and growth. The first signs that something was wrong came from the communication networks. The quantum relay system that connected the galaxy had been working perfectly for decades. It carried messages, data, and trade information between thousands of worlds in real time. Without it, galactic civilization would collapse into isolated pockets. Chief Engineer Zain of the Hegemony of Sixes noticed the problem during routine maintenance. Small errors were appearing in the quantum calculations. Nothing major, just tiny, inconsistencies that made messages take a few seconds longer to arrive. The differences were so small that most users never noticed them. "It is probably just normal degradation," Zane told his supervisor. "These systems are very old. Some efficiency loss is expected over time." But the errors kept growing. By the end of the year, communication delays had increased to several minutes. Some messages were arriving scrambled or incomplete. A few trade contracts were lost when the data became corrupted during transmission. The hegemony brought in their best engineers to study the problem. They found something strange. The quantum relay system was more complex than anyone had realized. Hidden deep in the code were thousands of small adjustments and patches that kept the system running smoothly. These patches were slowly failing, one by one. "Who wrote these modifications?" asked the chief engineer. The answer came from the archived records. Every single patch had been created by human technicians over the past 30 years. The humans had never asked permission or told anyone what they were doing. They had simply fixed problems as they found them, quietly keeping the galaxy's most important system from breaking down. Now, with no humans to maintain the patches, the system was slowly falling apart. Similar discoveries were being made across the galaxy. The Thylorian agricultural worlds were facing crop failures as soil conditions changed in unexpected ways. Investigation revealed that human botanists had been secretly adjusting soil chemistry for decades, preventing ecological collapse that would have destroyed farming on dozens of worlds. The Mordani Shipping Consortium found that their automated cargo routes were becoming less efficient each month. Trade ships were taking longer paths and burning more fuel. The routing algorithms that had worked perfectly for years were now making poor decisions. Deep in the system logs, they found evidence of human programmers who had been constantly updating the algorithms to account for changing galactic conditions. Even more disturbing was what happened between species. Border disputes that had remained cold for decades suddenly erupted into violence. The Quellian territories and the Nexari Federation began fighting over mining rights in the Eta Cygni system. Both sides claimed the other had broken their old agreements. When council investigators examined the records, they found something unexpected. The agreements were incredibly complex, full of contradictions and unclear language. For 30 years, these contradictions had been resolved through informal discussions led by human mediators. The humans had never held official positions in these negotiations. They had simply been present at trade meetings and diplomatic conferences, offering suggestions and helping species understand each other. Without human mediation, old agreements fell apart. Each species interpreted the contracts in ways that favored themselves. What had once been friendly disagreements became serious conflicts. The Council tried to replace these functions with their own people. They hired Zephyrian engineers to fix the communication networks. They brought in Crystal Collective scientists to manage agricultural systems. They assigned Velcran diplomats to mediate disputes. The results were disappointing. The Zephyrian engineers were skilled, but they thought in very different ways than humans. Their solutions were logical but inflexible. When unexpected problems arose, their systems could not adapt. The human patches had been messy and improvised, but they had worked because humans were good at finding creative solutions to complex problems. The Crystal Collective scientists approached agriculture like a mathematical equation. They could optimize crop yields under perfect conditions, but they could not handle the chaos of real ecosystems. Human botanists had understood that nature was unpredictable and had built flexibility into their systems. The Velcran diplomats were fair and logical, but they could not connect with other species emotionally. Humans had been able to understand how different cultures thought and felt. They could find compromises that satisfied everyone because they cared about making everyone happy, not just solving the immediate problem. As the problems grew worse, some council members began to suggest that maybe they should contact humanity and ask for help. The suggestion was quickly rejected by most species. Humanity had chosen to leave. They had made their decision. The galaxy would adapt and find new solutions. Besides, where would they even look? Human space had gone completely silent. Long-range sensors showed no activity in any system that had once been inhabited by humans. It was as if an entire species had simply vanished from the galaxy. They probably went into hibernation somewhere, suggested Counselor Thane. Humans were always dramatic. They are probably waiting for us to beg them to come back. We will not give them that satisfaction. Council voted to continue their replacement programs. They hired more engineers, more scientists, more diplomats. They increased funding for research into communication technology and agricultural management. They created new departments to handle interspecies mediation. Slowly, very slowly, some systems began to improve. The communication networks stabilized, though they never worked as well as they had before. Agricultural yields recovered, though several worlds had to abandon farming entirely. New diplomatic protocols reduced conflicts, though tensions remained high between many species. The galaxy was learning to function without humanity. It was harder than anyone had expected, and the results were not as good as what came before, but it was possible. Most council members felt proud of their adaptability. They had overcome a major challenge through determination and cooperation. The few who expressed regret about humanity's departure were quietly discouraged from bringing up the subject. The galaxy had moved on. There was no point in dwelling on the past. But late at night, in private conversations, some council members wondered what had really happened to the humans. And sometimes, when communication systems glitched or when diplomatic talks collapsed into shouting matches, they remembered the calm voices and creative solutions that had once made everything work just a little bit better. The silence where humanity used to be was not empty. It was full of all the small miracles that no one had noticed until they were gone. 7 years after humanity's departure, the galaxy was starting to crack. Director Yas of the Hegemony of Sixes stared at the massive display screen showing their quantum communication network. Red warning lights blinked across dozens of systems. What had started as minor delays had become major failures. Entire sectors were losing contact with the galactic network for hours at a time. "Sir, we have lost all communication with the Outer Rim territories," reported his chief technician. "The quantum relays in that region have gone completely offline." Yas felt a cold fear in his stomach. The Outer Rim contained 43 inhabited worlds and 3 major trade hubs. Without communication, they were cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Ships could still travel there, but it would take weeks to get messages back and forth. "How long to repair?" he asked. The technician looked uncomfortable. "Sir, we do not understand how the system was supposed to work in the first place. The human modifications are too complex. Every time we try to fix one problem, we create 3 new ones. Our best estimate is 6 months, maybe longer." 6 months. Yas tried to imagine explaining to the council that nearly 50 worlds would be isolated for half a year. The economic damage alone would be enormous. Worse, some of those worlds depended on food shipments from other systems. Without communication to coordinate deliveries, people might starve. Similar crises were erupting across the galaxy. On the agricultural world of Verdania, the soil chemistry had changed so dramatically that nothing would grow. The Thylorian scientists brought in to replace human botanists had tried to fix the problem with chemical fertilizers. Instead, they had created dead zones where even bacteria could not survive. The humans must have been using some kind of advanced biotechnology, explained Dr. Neath, the lead Thylorian researcher. "We can detect traces of engineered microorganisms in the soil, but we cannot replicate them. Without the original specimens, we cannot rebuild the ecosystem." Millions of people on Verdania faced starvation. Emergency food shipments were being organized, but the communication failures made coordination nearly impossible. Some ships arrived at worlds that did not need food, while others never received the supplies they desperately required. The Mordani Shipping Consortium was facing its own disaster. Their automated cargo system had become so inefficient that transport costs had doubled. Ships were taking routes that made no sense, burning fuel to visit empty systems while ignoring profitable trade opportunities. Captain Grix had been flying cargo ships for 20 years. He remembered when human programmers used to update the routing system every few months. They would gather data from hundreds of ships and adjust the algorithms to account for changing conditions. Pirates in one system, new colonies in another, seasonal weather patterns, political tensions. The humans had somehow kept track of thousands of variables and made the system work perfectly. It was like magic, he told his crew. My cargo hold was always full, my routes were always profitable, and I never wasted time flying to the wrong places. Now I spend half my time empty and the other half lost. The consortium had hired Zephyrian mathematicians to rebuild the routing system. Their solution was logical and precise, but it could not handle the chaos of real galactic commerce. The mathematics assumed that conditions remained constant, but the galaxy was always changing. Pirates moved, colonies grew, trade agreements shifted. The human system had adapted to these changes automatically. The Zephyrian system had to be manually updated, and by the time updates were made, conditions had changed again. But the worst crisis was the violence. The border war between the Quellian territories and the Nexari Federation had escalated into full military conflict. Both sides had called up their fleets and were fighting for control of the Eta Xigni system. Ambassador Cole of the Velcron Empire had been assigned to mediate the dispute. She was experienced and fair-minded, but she could not understand why the two species hated each other so much. The original trade agreement seemed clear enough to her. Each side should have equal access to the mining facilities. What she did not understand was the history behind the agreements. 30 years of small disputes, cultural misunderstandings, and personal rivalries between negotiators. Human mediators had managed these underlying tensions by building personal relationships with leaders from both species. They had known when to push for compromise and when to let emotions cool down. They had understood that successful diplomacy was about more than just legal documents. The Velcron approach was to focus on the law. Ambassador Cole read the contracts carefully and made logical recommendations. But the Quellians felt that the Nexari had been cheating for years, while the Nexari believed that the Quellians were trying to steal what rightfully belonged to them. Both sides had evidence to support their claims, and both felt betrayed by decades of what they saw as unfair treatment. Without human mediators to help them understand each other's perspectives, the two species could only see each other as enemies. The war was spreading to other systems as old allies were forced to choose sides. Across the galaxy, similar conflicts were erupting. Species that had cooperated for decades were discovering that their relationships had been held together by human intervention. Trade disputes became diplomatic crises. Cultural misunderstandings became accusations of betrayal. Minor disagreements became major confrontations. The Council tried desperately to maintain order. They increased military patrols along disputed borders. They created new diplomatic protocols for resolving conflicts. They offered economic incentives for peaceful cooperation. Nothing worked as well as the old system had. The human approach had been informal and personal. It had relied on relationships and trust rather than rules and enforcement. Other species could copy the human methods, but they could not replicate the human ability to genuinely care about making everyone happy. In the depths of space, long-range sensors detected something unusual. Energy signatures were appearing near the galactic edge, far beyond any known star systems. The readings were enormous, suggesting technologies that should not have existed. Some scientists speculated about ancient alien artifacts or natural phenomena. A few wondered if the signals might be coming from human space. The Council voted to send exploration ships to investigate, but the communication failures made coordination impossible. 3 different fleets were sent to the same region while other areas went unexplored. 2 of the fleets never reported back, lost somewhere in the vast emptiness between galaxies. The 3rd fleet found abandoned human colonies at the edge of known space. The planets were empty but not destroyed. Infrastructure remained intact, but all the people were gone. There were signs that the evacuation had been planned and orderly. The humans had not fled in panic. They had simply left. More disturbing were the technological artifacts left behind. The humans had been experimenting with energy sources that other species did not recognize. They had built computers that operated on principles that galactic science said were impossible. They had created materials that should not have been able to exist. How did they advance so quickly? Asked the expedition leader. 7 years ago, human technology was centuries behind most Council species. Now we are finding equipment that we cannot even understand. The answer was in the abandoned research facilities. Without the social and political obligations of council, membership humanity had focused entirely on scientific advancement. They had poured all their resources into research and development. More importantly, they had approached problems in uniquely human ways, with creativity, intuition, and a willingness to try impossible solutions. Other species were logical and methodical in their research. They built on existing knowledge and followed established procedures. Humans had been chaotic and experimental. They had tried ideas that should not have worked and somehow made them successful. The expedition returned to council space with reports that terrified the leadership. Humanity had not simply left the galaxy. They had evolved beyond it. Somewhere out in the darkness between stars, an entire species was developing technologies that could reshape reality itself. And the galaxy they had left behind was falling apart without them. Council sessions that had once been models of efficiency now devolved into arguments and accusations. Species blamed each other for the growing crises. The communication failures made coordination impossible. The agricultural disasters created refugee problems that overwhelmed relief systems. The military conflicts consumed resources and destroyed trust between former allies. Some council members quietly began to suggest that maybe it was time to find humanity and ask them to return. The suggestion was still rejected by most species, but the rejections were less confident than before. Pride was becoming harder to maintain as the galaxy crumbled around them. In the silence where humanity used to be, something was stirring. The humans had not simply vanished. They had transformed into something new and powerful, and sooner or later the galaxy would have to face the consequences of driving them away. The alarms began on a quiet morning in the 8th year after humanity's departure. Counselor Vex was reviewing trade reports when his aide burst into his office, scales pale with fear. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," Kess said, her voice shaking. "The deep space monitoring stations have detected something coming out of dark space." Vex followed her to the command center, where dozens of technicians worked frantically at their stations. The main display showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with hundreds of red dots moving inward from the outer rim. "What am I looking at?" Vex asked. Commander Wraith of the Galactic Defense Force pointed at the display. "Void hunters, sir. More than we have ever seen before. Our computers count over 3,000 ships moving toward inhabited space." Vex felt his blood turn cold. The Void Hunters were the nightmare that haunted every galactic species, ancient enemies that emerged from the empty spaces between galaxies to destroy all life they encountered. They had attacked twice before in recorded history. Both times it had taken the combined might of all galactic species to barely drive them back. "How long until they reach the outer colonies?" Vex asked. 18 days to the first settlements, 6 weeks to reach the core worlds." Vex activated the emergency council session protocols. Within hours, representatives from every major species had gathered in the council chamber. The mood was grim as Commander Wraith explained the situation. "The Void Hunter fleet is larger than anything in our historical records," he said. "Previous attacks involved a few hundred ships at most. This force could overwhelm our defenses before we have time to organize a proper response." Counselor Thane of the Crystal Collective leaned forward. "What do our military analysts recommend?" "That is the problem," Commander Wraith replied. "Our current defense plans were created 50 years ago based on the strategies that worked in the last Void Hunter War. But the military coordinators who developed those plans were human." The chamber fell silent. Everyone remembered the human military advisors who had served with distinction during the previous crisis. They had been strategic geniuses, able to coordinate the chaotic mix of different species' military forces into an effective fighting unit. "Surely we can adapt their strategies," said Ambassador Cole. Commander Wraith shook his head. "We have tried, but human military thinking was very different from ours. They used tactics that seemed illogical, but somehow worked. More importantly, they were able to get species to cooperate even when they traditionally hated each other. Our current military leaders cannot replicate that ability." The council spent 3 days trying to organize a defense. Every species had their own military traditions and command structures. The Zephyrians preferred long-range bombardment from heavily shielded ships. The Velcran Empire used swarms of fast attack craft. The Crystal Collective relied on massive defensive platforms. The Nexari favored stealth ships and surprise attacks. In previous wars, human coordinators had found ways to make these different approaches work together. They had created battle plans that used each species' strengths while covering their weaknesses. Without human leadership, the Alliance was a collection of individual armies that could not fight as one. The first Void Hunter attack came at the mining colony of Kepler 7. The irony was not lost on anyone. This was one of the systems near the old Kepler sector where the plague crisis had occurred 8 years earlier. The colony's defenses were overwhelmed in minutes. 3 million people died before help could arrive. News of the defeat spread panic across the galaxy. Refugee ships fled from the outer rim toward the safer core worlds. The communication network, already unstable, collapsed completely under the emergency traffic. Entire sectors lost contact with Galactic Command. The second attack targeted the Quellian homeworld. The Quellian and Nexari fleets, which had been fighting each other for months, suddenly found themselves facing a common enemy. They tried to work together, but years of conflict had destroyed their ability to trust each other. Confusion and miscommunication led to friendly fire incidents. The Void Hunters destroyed both fleets while they were shooting at each other. As reports of defeats poured in, some council members made a desperate suggestion. "We need to find the humans," said Dr. Neth of the Thylorian healing houses. "They are the only ones who understand how to fight the Void Hunters effectively." "The humans abandoned us," Counselor Vex replied. "We cannot count on them to save us now." "Then we all die," Dr. Neth said simply. "Because our current strategies are not working." The debate that followed was fierce. Pride warred with desperation, as species argued about whether to seek human help. Some insisted that the galaxy could defend itself without humanity's assistance. Others pointed out that the defense was already failing catastrophically. Finally, the Council voted to send envoys to locate humanity and request aid. The vote was closer than anyone wanted to admit. 26 species in favor, 21 against. The search began immediately. Fast scout ships were sent to every system where humans had once lived. What they found was disturbing. Human colonies were not just abandoned, they were completely clean. Buildings stood empty but undamaged. Equipment was neatly stored. Personal belongings were gone, but public infrastructure remained intact. It was as if humanity had planned their departure carefully and taken only what belonged to them personally. They had left behind anything that might be useful to other species. Even their research facilities contained detailed notes about ongoing projects as if they wanted to help, but could not stay to finish the work themselves. The most disturbing discovery came from the edge of human space. Long-range sensors detected enormous energy signatures moving away from the galaxy at impossible speeds. The readings suggested technologies that violated known laws of physics. Whatever humanity had become, they were no longer bound by the limitations that constrained other species. One scout ship managed to intercept an automated beacon at the very edge of galactic space. The message was simple and devastating. The Terran Commonwealth has relocated beyond this galaxy's borders. Do not follow. We wish you peace, but we cannot return to a place that chose efficiency over compassion. The message was signed by Sarah Chen, now identified as Director of Human Affairs. 8 years had passed since her angry departure from the council chamber, but her words still carried the same moral certainty that had once frustrated so many council members. As the Void Hunters continued their advance, destroying world after world, the council faced a terrible realization. They had not just lost humanity's help, they had lost their moral center. For decades, humans had been the conscience of galactic civilization. They had pushed other species to be better than they naturally were. Without that influence, the galaxy had become exactly what the humans had accused it of being, a collection of selfish interests with no higher purpose. The defense of the galaxy continued, but everyone knew it was hopeless. Individual species fought bravely, but they could not coordinate effectively. Ancient rivalries and recent conflicts prevented the cooperation that victory required. The communication failures made tactical coordination impossible. The refugee crisis overwhelmed supply lines and created chaos behind the front lines. World after world fell to the Void Hunters. The Outer Rim was completely lost. The Middle Territories were under assault. Soon, the core worlds themselves would be threatened. In the council chamber, representatives sat in stunned silence as reports of new defeats arrived hourly. The efficient, logical civilization they had built was crumbling under pressure. Without human idealism to hold it together, the galaxy was revealing itself to be as cold and selfish as humanity had always claimed. "We made a mistake," Counselor Thane said quietly. "We thought we were getting rid of troublemakers who slowed us down. Instead, we drove away the only species that truly cared about making things better." "It is too late for regrets," Counselor Vex replied. "We must work with what we have." But deep in his heart, Vex knew the truth. They had built their efficient civilization on a foundation of human compassion and creativity. Without that foundation, everything was falling apart. The galaxy was learning too late what they had really lost when they chose silence over the sound of human voices demanding that they be better than they were. The Void Hunters reached the core worlds on a day when 3 suns aligned over the council capital. Their massive ships blotted out the light as they descended through the atmosphere, weapons charging for what would be the final strike against galactic civilization. In the council chamber, the last representatives of 47 species sat in their seats, watching the end approach on their screens. The great alliance that had ruled the galaxy for centuries was about to die. Most of the outer worlds were already gone. The Middle Territories had fallen after brief, hopeless battles. Now the Void Hunters had come to finish what they started. Counselor Vex looked around the chamber at faces filled with despair and regret. The Zephyrian military had fought bravely, but could not coordinate with other species effectively. The Crystal Collective's defensive platforms had held for days before being overwhelmed. The Velcron swarm tactics had inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy but could not stop their advance. "Final fleet status report," Commander Wraith announced, his voice hollow. "All outer defense lines have collapsed. The last functional military units are falling back to protect the homeworlds. Estimated time until complete defeat, 6 hours. 6 hours. Vex thought about all the things that had led to this moment. The plague crisis 8 years ago, humanity's angry departure, the slow breakdown of everything the humans had quietly maintained, the pride that had prevented them from seeking help until it was too late. "Sir," a communications officer called. "Out. We are receiving an emergency transmission from the edge of the system." "From whom?" Commander Wraith asked. "Unknown vessels, sir. The energy signatures are unlike anything in our database." The main screen flickered and then showed something impossible. Ships were emerging from hyperspace near the system's outer edge. They were sleek and beautiful, their hulls seeming to bend light around them. The designs were familiar yet completely transformed, as if someone had taken the simple, practical vessels that humans once built and elevated them into works of art. "How many ships?" Vex asked. The officer checked his readings twice before answering. 12, sir. Just 12 ships. 12 ships against 3,000 Void Hunters." It would have been laughable if the situation had not been so desperate. But as the unknown vessels moved toward the battle, something strange happened. The Void Hunter fleet stopped its advance and turned to face this new threat. The communication system crackled to life. A voice spoke in perfect galactic standard, with the slight accent that marked it as human. But there was something different about it, something that suggested vast experience and terrible sadness. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Commonwealth. We have detected Void Hunter activity in this system. All civilian ships should evacuate immediately." Sarah Chen, the woman who had walked out of the council chamber 8 years ago in anger and disappointment. Vex felt his heart racing as her image appeared on the screen. She looked older, with gray hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent dealing with impossible challenges. But there was something else different about her, an aura of power and confidence that had not been there before. She wore a uniform that seemed to be made of starlight itself, and behind her, the bridge of her ship showed technology that looked like magic. "Admiral Chen," Vex transmitted. "This is Counselor Vex of the Galactic Council. We We request assistance against the Void Hunter threat. Sarah's expression did not change. Counselor Vex, I remember you. You voted to quarantine the Kepler sector and let 3 million people die rather than risk helping them. The words hit like physical blows. Around the chamber, council members shifted uncomfortably. The woman they had once dismissed as emotional and impractical now held their lives in her hands. Admiral, we know we made mistakes, Vex said, but millions of people are about to die. Whatever our past differences, surely you cannot let that happen. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was filled with the same moral certainty that had once frustrated the council, but now it carried the weight of absolute authority. You are right, she said. We cannot let innocent people die, no matter what their governments have done. All human ships engage the Void Hunters. Show them what we have learned in our exile. What happened next would be remembered as the greatest military miracle in galactic history. The 12 human ships moved against the Void Hunter fleet with impossible grace and speed. Their weapons tore holes in reality itself, destroying enemy vessels with single shots. They moved through space as if the laws of physics were merely suggestions, appearing and disappearing at will. But it was not just their technology that was advanced. The way they fought showed a level of tactical brilliance that no council species could match. The human ships moved as one organism, each vessel knowing exactly where the others would be and what they would do. They anticipated Void Hunter movements, before the enemy had even decided what those movements would be. Within an hour, the massive Void Hunter fleet was scattered and retreating. The ancient enemies that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia fled from 12 human ships like frightened children running from thunder. As the last Void Hunter vessel disappeared into dark space, Sarah Chen's ship approached the council world. Her image reappeared on the chamber screens, and this time Vex could see the full scope of what humanity had become. The humans were no longer quite human in the way the council remembered. They had evolved, not just technologically but in ways that were harder to understand. They moved with perfect coordination, spoke with shared knowledge, and fought with a unity of purpose that transcended individual identity. The immediate threat has been eliminated, Sarah announced. But you should know that this was just a scouting force. The main Void Hunter armada is still out there, growing stronger. They will return in greater numbers unless the root cause of their aggression is addressed. What root cause? Asked Dr. Neth. Sarah's smile was sad and knowing. The Void Hunters are not evil, Doctor. They are an immune response. They appear when galactic civilization becomes too selfish, too focused on efficiency and profit instead of growth and compassion. They are nature's way of clearing space for species that might do better. The chamber erupted in confused voices. The idea that the Void Hunters served some cosmic purpose was disturbing and difficult to accept. Sarah continued speaking over the noise. For 30 years, humanity served as the galaxy's conscience. We pushed you to be better than your natural instincts. We prevented the conflicts that would have summoned the Void Hunters sooner. When we left, that protection ended. Then stay, Counselor Thane pleaded. Help us rebuild. Teach us how to be better. Sarah shook her head slowly. We tried that once. You chose silence over our voices. You chose efficiency over compassion. You made it clear that you did not want our help unless it came without moral obligations. We were wrong, Vex said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. We see that now. Please give us another chance. For a moment, Sarah's expression softened, and Vex could see the woman who had once fought so passionately for the plague victims in the Kepler sector. But then her face hardened again. We have learned that some species can only grow through suffering, she said. The galaxy rejected our guidance when it was offered freely. Perhaps it will value wisdom more when it must be earned through hardship. The human ships began to move away from the council world. On the screen, Sarah delivered her final message to the galaxy that had rejected her. We have cleansed the immediate threat because innocent lives were at stake. But we will not stay to rebuild what you destroyed through your own choices. The next time the Void Hunters come, and they will come, you must face them with the civilization you have built for yourselves. She paused, and for just a moment her voice carried the same hope that had once inspired millions. Perhaps you will surprise us. Perhaps you will learn to value compassion over efficiency, cooperation over competition, growth over comfort. If you do, the Void Hunters will never return. The choice, as always, is yours. The transmission ended. The human ships disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind only the fading energy signatures of technologies that the galaxy could not understand. In the council chamber, representatives sat in stunned silence. They had been saved, but the rescue felt more like a judgment. The humans had not returned as saviors. They had come as disappointed parents cleaning up after children who had refused to learn from their mistakes. Slowly, painfully, the galaxy began to rebuild. But this time, some species remembered the lesson. They established new rules about helping worlds in crisis. They created systems for sharing technology with developing civilizations. They built institutions focused on cooperation instead of competition. It was not enough to bring the humans back. The silence where their voices had been remained empty. But perhaps, if they tried hard enough, if they truly learned to value what the humans had tried to teach them, they might one day become worthy of rejoining the larger community of compassionate species. The humans had left in silence, but their final gift was the sound of a galaxy trying, for the first time, to find its own moral voice. Whether that voice would be strong enough to keep the darkness at bay remained to be seen.